Yeah.
Well, this is cool to talk to you because I've heard your voice forever, and it's nice to have a face with the voice and get
Yeah,
this.
it's disappointing to most people, I recognize, but I'm doing my best. I'm trying to lose that COVID-19. I've got about 14 left to go, but
Right, right. Well, so I'm kind of curious. Take me back to the beginning. You know, you do all these different things. What? How did you get started?
well, about 40 years or so ago, my parents loved each other a whole lot. I don't think that that's what you want to hear about, but when I was about 6 or 7, it may have actually even been earlier than that. Let me put a timeline on. Maybe I was 4 or 5. It was when Michael Jackson's Thriller came out, the most selling album of all time. And the music video to Thriller um, was one that, like, it was shown on TV all the time, that kind of stuff. And I remember trying to dance. This is probably my first memory, trying to dance to Michael Jackson's Thriller on the hearth of our fireplace in my childhood home. And I just was mimicking what I would see on TV, and I wasn't good. I don't have any sort of thought that I was good, but my my they would say, "Hey, show them the dance that you do. Show them that dance." And so I would do this, some part of Michael Jackson's Thriller up on the hearth, and people were like, "Oh, that's so great." It was a way for me to get attention, and I would dare say that it was probably at that moment that I was sort of hooked into entertaining people, or certainly being something that people could look to kind of break free from what their regular routine or thought would be like, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. So it's just kind of something. That's just kind of your personality. Sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, so my older brother, if I'm being to kind of loop in other pieces, I had an older brother who was into theater, and like most younger brothers, they like to do whatever their older brother does, at least in some, on some level. So that's part of it. I served a mission for the LDS Church, and for a long time I had sort of adopted this mantra that school is when you play and do the fun stuff, and then home you be a businessman, you're serious. And I had in that last time of my service, one of the other missionaries I'd served with, he was a little bit older, and he had some actual hands-on experience doing some of the things that I wanted to do. And he expressed to me, "Hey, yeah, this is a thing you can do. You can entertain people, make money, provide for a family, and that's a very real thing." And I think that, maybe more than any of the other times, that was the time that I went, "Oh, this could actually be a path. It doesn't have to be just something I do, as far as, a hobby or something like that. I could actually make a go of this." And so I have.
So when did radio become part of your thoughts?
Well, so that I guess I tell sort of two stories. When I was a much younger kid, there used to be a show that was on our very aggressive rock radio station called the Domenico Show. It's where Al start. It's where they used to play parody songs, and it was on late at night on Sunday night. And so I had to sneak. We had one of those dual cassette recorders, so you could record the radio on one, and then you could record out the commercials and transfer it to another tape on the other side.
Gotcha.
And I would stay up super late and record the radio, and then I would take these funny songs to school on this, essentially like a boombox, and play these songs for my friends. And it was essentially just taped radio, and we'd laugh when we didn't understand the jokes, but we laughed, and I was like, "Oh, this radio is kind of a thing." And then that same mission companion from when I served, he had one of the things that he had interest in was doing radio. I'd never considered it, but the college that I went to had a radio program, and I was like, "Oh, I kind of like that guy." And I think maybe I similar things that he had, enrolled in the class. And then once I started taking that radio class and having an opportunity to be on the air, I was like, "Oh, this is it. Let's do this thing."
Okay. Talk about you mentioned your mission that you served for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You want to talk about your faith and the role that that's played in your life?
having the opportunity to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I went to Cleveland, Ohio, which has a tremendous amount of church history. Right, we have the Kirtland area, everything that is there. The Hiram area, that's where probably most famously Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered, and so it was a unique opportunity for me to be able to not only learn about these incidences within the church's history, but also to be able to see how so many people push through these trials and were able to come through it with God's help. So, on a very hands-on, very real life practice, I was able to see, read, and experience some of those trials myself. Now, I wasn't ever tarred and feathered, spoiler, but there was certainly some times where I just felt like these are the greatest challenges that I would ever be asked um, to sacrifice through, to make my way through, to just remain hopeful through. And so that there was that part of it, and then the other part for me, sort of faith and community go together, is the way that as a church community, and I don't think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has like the trademark on this, but a church community can help you through the hardest things. When they say it takes a town to raise a child, or a village that raises the child, I think it takes a whole group of people to help get through the thing called. So for me, that's another huge part of just sort of walking my path, or living my journey, or leading my life, that the church has been just a tremendous benefit.
So the Cultural Hall, the podcast that you host,
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong here at all, but it's so that's very, very much about kind of the cultural aspect of the LDS Church.
Sure.
Anything and everything related to the LDS Church.
Yeah.
Doctrinal stuff. It could be kind of the more pop culture, funny little quirks about it. You talk to guests. It's kind of a wide variety of stuff, but it's just this big, all-encompassing podcast about LDS based stuff.
Right.
So you were talking about your faith, but so what was the inspiration for this podcast? What made you decide to start this
Well,
podcast?
I'll be with you. I'll be honest with you. It was a couple things. One, it was just, so we've been doing it for 10 years. And if we could rewind to 10 years ago, there was a point in time where podcasts sort of had their first wave. And a friend of mine at the time, he had a podcast, and he was having a lot of fun with it and finding success in it. And I was like, well, I want to have a podcast. And I thought, well, what is something that I enjoy? What is something that I feel like I could talk to about with some level of knowledge or experience? And so that kind of became the church. So that was part of it. The second part was, and it's embarrassing to sort of mention now, but when I originally started, one of the reasons why I started it is I really just wanted to meet what I deemed to be famous people that were members of the church. And so it was just going to be a vehicle for me to be, because if I just went to a famous member of the church and said, hey, can we just talk? That seems weird. Or, sort of approach like that. But if I'm like, hey, I'm a host who has a show that would love to talk to you about that, it seemed to sort of validate my fandom of those who would be famous people. Get about 5 episodes into doing the podcast, and which I would say, if there's people that listen to this and hear you call it a podcast, we go to great lengths to make sure that everybody knows that it is a show available in podcast form, because anybody can have a podcast, but we have a show. Is there a distinguishment? In our mind, there is. So just a quick side tangent. As we got about 5 episodes into the show, we realized that the power and the impact that we had was far greater than just, visiting with, again, air quoting, famous people. So we started to move into social issues and things that weren't talked about in our Sunday school classes, and wanted to talk about the hard things and funny things and big things. So when we tried to, because most hosts of podcasts would tell you, be very specific. In fact, as I consult, one of the things that I do additionally on the side is I consult podcasts, and And I tell people, be pretty specific, right? The biggest famous quote about podcasts is that the riches are in the niches. So as much as you can make yourself a niche, you can really super serve those people. And we didn't want to limit ourselves to just church history or just church culture. So we just say anything to do with the church from a pro standpoint. That's what we talk about.
Let me ask you this question. What is your favorite, is there a particular aspect of the LDS church that you find humorous or strange or
The people are so weird. Every single one of us is so weird, from how we are so strict about some things, right? Man, we will be so strict on word, or they're either actual doctrine or urban folklore doctrine. It has to be this way. And then we will look at something else that is probably, against most people's morals. And we go, yeah, no, not that. That's a different thing that I'm going to do. We are just so perfectly flawed that is the thing that I just love it. And I love being able to talk about it. And I love being able to ask people about it and to hear where they arrive at it, because they don't, anyone who's flawed, they aren't, I don't feel like they're saying, oh yeah, no, I'm 100% hypocritical as far as this goes. They go, oh no, I don't do that because this, but I totally do that thing because I have arrived there. It's my own free will. I have my agency to do that. And you can apply that to political things that are going on now, and I think that applies, but it also applies very much to the things that we can find within ships, or the things we would do within our callings, or any of that kind of stuff. We are so beautifully, perfectly flawed that I'm fascinated by it.
can you think of any specifics off the top of your head of some of those things you were talking about?
Well, so I mean, politically, I'll sort of run the gamut as far as things go. Politically speaking, people that wear masks or don't wear masks, and when we're encouraged by leaders of the church to do one or the other of those things, and take, for example, those that maybe wouldn't wear a mask, that same apostle could ask them to pick up a handcart and go to Missouri and sell all that they have, and for whatever reason they'd be on board. Man, their house would be listed before the day is over, but you ask them to put a mask on, and for whatever reason they aren't willing to do that. That's a little politically charged, so that's one that I absolutely love. Is sort of this, so within LDS culture, we sort of talk, and we don't have the copyright on this either, but the sort of letter of the law, spirit of the law thing. Certainly most people are familiar that Mormons don't drink coffee, and people will find different justifications for it. But when we talk about the word of wisdom, a synonymous phrase for it would be the Lord's law of health, right? Taking care of your body. Your body is a gift from God, so you take care of it. And so people that are like, coffee, no way. I will not drink a single ounce of coffee, as they drink their 100-ounce, dirty Diet Coke that they already have filled up 4 times that day. Like, to me, I just am like, oh, okay, so is that what we think that he was probably saying? Was like, no. If your coffee is, or if your caffeine is cold and bubbly, or, take yourself, do things, but it's just, again, it's so funny the way we split a hair because we're willing to sacrifice one thing and maybe not sacrifice another.
Talk about some of your favorite guests.
We had Jim Gaffigan, the comedian.
Right.
He is an ardent Catholic. And we had him on not only to talk about comedy, but to talk about his faith. So that's kind of a fun one that we point to. Other folks that we've had that mean a bit more to members of the church. We've had Rick Turley, who is the former historian for the church. Recently released. He was pretty fascinating. Tons of historians, and Brad Wilcox, who was recently appointed to the Young Men's Presidency, a general authority in the church. We've had him on. We had a gentleman who And again, you have to rewind 10 years. He was serving in a bishopric as an executive secretary as a gay man 10 years ago. That's almost unheard of. He was one of the first. And so having the opportunity to talk to him, those are probably some of the ones of note that we would point to.
Can you point to one episode or one guest that you really enjoyed in particular?
Pick one. How do I pick just one? It's like picking a favorite child. I'll speak to a genre of things. That the early church history. So we're talking like 1820 to 1850. Any guess that we have there, because there is the narrative that is taught within the church, which is great and is true, but there's so much that surrounds the narrative that we don't talk about, not because we're keeping secrets or having mysteries, but because just for being able to teach everything, there's just not time. Some of the nuances of how things changed through the restoration, or when the saints moved from Kirtland to Nauvoo, how things changed, or what, what was important in Kirtland wasn't important in Nauvoo, or vice versa. Anything that surrounds church history, we end up only sharing about an hour of an episode, but likely those episodes went somewhere between an hour and 5 minutes. I sort of nerded out, but realized I got so far in the weeds that it wasn't accessible for anyone but me and the other person.
And in a recent episode, I actually heard you talk about that. You talked about how your wife edits the show, and she actually made the comment, "What was the point of that episode?" Because sometimes you get just shooting the breeze with a guest, and it just turns into you two just talking,
Yeah.
which are actually, I would imagine, probably some of the more popular episodes.
The person that you're talking about is Hank Smith. That was a most recent episode, came out on Christmas Day. That was the part 2, because my wife said, listen, in the first episode, all you guys talked about was like going to a jazz game and being friends, if you guys had friends and all this stuff. And it can be like that sometimes, because I mean, it just is that casual. I try and really be respectful of people's time. If they're going to give me an hour's worth of that time, that's something they're not going to get back. So I want to make sure that it's of value. If it's a story of struggle that they can relate to, if it's something of interest that they can kind of, nerd out or be informed by, if it's something that they can put into place to make their religious journey or their marriage or their families better, I always want to make sure that as they walk away from it, that they're going, I am better because I gave him an hour of my time.
We're talking about your wife. You've also mentioned your wife is actually not a member of the church.
Yeah.
So what's that like? You've got you as an active member of the LDS church, and then your wife is not. What's that dynamic like?
So this is actually my second marriage. In my first marriage, my wife was kind of a member in name only. So when it came to church things, because it was always something growing up, right? You marry someone who's active in the church, and you sort of have this plan laid out. And so I did that. And in the first go round, it didn't work out the way that I wanted to. So when I was looking to get married a second time, I thought, you know what? I'm going to marry someone whom I love and whom I feel like makes me a better person. If they're a member of the church, bonus, because I think in some ways that makes things a little easier. You have the same belief structure, but she has been 1,000% supportive. She comes to church with me every week. Several people in our ward are surprised when they find out that she is not a member of the church. They're like, oh, we kind of thought you were because you're here more than we are. But on a very personal level, I love that she will ask me the question of, why do you do that? Why do you do whatever that religious practice may be, or, service opportunity or whatever? She will ask, hey, why are you doing that? And I think that when we get into sort of the rut of things or the regular routine of things, we don't think about it. And sometimes they just become boxes that we check, or, a to-do list of religion. And she's along the way stopping and going, I'm fine with you doing that, but why are you doing that? And I go, oh, I guess I don't really know. Or, oh, I'm doing this for the wrong reason right now. Or when I go and do whatever this thing is, it really helps to set an intention that I go, oh, I'm doing this because this reason. And it helps me, be online in check.
Well, what's something that very few people know about you?
You always hear that question, tell me something, scoop me, let me have the opportunity to know something that you've never told anyone before. And as I sit here and I'm being honest, and it's not this like badge on my chest that I'm like, hi, I'm an open book, but I can't think of a single thing.
I guess I have a specific question related to that
Hit me.
I wanted to shoot you with, and if you're totally not comfortable answering it, that's totally fine.
Let's do it.
I did hear you mention recently that you were once excommunicated from the church
Sure.
and
Sure.
rebaptized.
Yeah.
Talk about that if you're willing to.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that so many people maybe would be like, well, that's something that not a lot of people talk about or that we don't know. In the spring of 2002 was when I was excommunicated, and then I was rebaptized in the winter of 2010. So I was out of the church for about 8.5 years, all the while still going to church. As an excommunicated member of the LDS church, you can't hold callings, you can't pray in church. You're essentially there, but not really there. Because of the extroverted personality that I have, that was particularly challenging because people would be like, hey, would you like to? And I was like, more than ever, I'd like to say a prayer or hold a calling or help somebody out. But I just, I wasn't essentially allowed to do that. So within the LDS Church, they have pretty strict, and this is no surprise to most people, but they have pretty strict regulations around like sexual transgressions, and especially sexual transgressions before marriage, and even heightened sexual transgressions. And I'm speaking vague because I don't know how specific we would need or want to get as far as this goes. But it's especially egregious, harder to say than you would think, for those that have been through the temple and made the covenants that exist in the temple, and then commit sexual sins. So lest it be thought that people think I was sleeping around a ton, that wasn't what I was doing, but it was offense enough that people thought, hey, we deem it that he should be excommunicated. And so for the first little while after 2002, 2003, I worked really hard to try and kind of be readmitted. But, as a guy in his early 20s, I think that probably one of the biggest vices is those things that are of a sexual nature. So kind of got caught up into a lot of that stuff. And so then a couple of months after I was married, I went back to the bishop and we started the process of being rebaptized. And then, like I say, December of 2010, joined the church again for the second time.
Well, so since you lost that and then having experience coming back, what's that like?
You know how you think, man, how does that person who lost a spouse, went through that terrible health crisis, whatever the thing is, and they come on the other side and go, I'm so grateful that I was able to go through this. And you're like, you had cancer. That's the worst thing. How could you possibly be grateful that you had cancer? But then you hear them talk about how they live each day differently than they did. If you'll allow me, I feel that same way with excommunication and members of the church who struggle in whatever kind of struggle they may have. I feel like I am now more able to feel the Spirit and a connection with individuals, because if people don't feel like a person has struggled or wouldn't know their toil, the struggles that they've had, I don't think that they share. But because of that unique experience that I had to be able to walk my own path, certainly, but a pretty hard religious path, and be able to empathize and relate to other people. I think, to echo back a statement you said at the very beginning of this, where it's like people just feel comfortable. I think people feel comfortable because I just don't care who they are. I just love them for who they are. And I didn't feel that way before I had communicated. So a gift of the Spirit, maybe. An extra helping of the Holy Ghost, sure. But, something that I, like cancer, hold dear, that I was able to go through, and maybe others wouldn't have been able to do it. Maybe they would have, and I'm just another cog on the big machine of life. But I'm grateful for it.
You've been very generous with your time, Richie, and we probably ought to wrap this up. let's kind of shift gears here, kind of end on a lighter note here. With the future of the cultural hall,
Mhm.
what are some guests or what are some topics that you'd like to see addressed?
Well, so the immediate future, super excited because in 21 we'll hit our 500th episode, which is huge. That number is a little misleading. We have way more than that, but for the sake of, public facing things, it'll be our 500th episode. We look forward to having 10,000 Facebook fans this year and 10,000 Twitter followers. And, we continue to live tweet and experience and sort of filter through our lens a general conference experience every 6 months. So those are immediate and sort of just, sort of standard things. Knowing now that like McKay Coppins from The Atlantic was able to secure an interview with President Nelson, I'm shooting for the moon. Let's get an interview with the prophet on the Cultural Hall. There's no reason not to. But seriously, I just hope to be able to really discuss any and everything. There's a lot of work to be done around LGBTQ issues. We have certainly talked about that, not shied away from it, but I think we can do more. There are issues politically that I feel like we could go into that without being divisive and sort of being healing. I see us sort of in that space. And who do I want? And I want Gladys Knight. I'm going to name a person. I want Gladys Knight and I want Donny Osmond in the Cultural Hall. That's my future. Together, if they're willing. I think they're both in Vegas in the fall. We can go see Donny's show where he sings with Gladys Knight and brings the Pips along. I don't know, some sort of phenomenal dual episode. Donny and Marie. I don't know.
Well, Richie, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I've enjoyed. And I especially appreciate you being willing to talk about some of those more personal things.
My pleasure.
To hear about. I look forward to listening to more of your podcast. And then, of course, if you live in the Utah area, you can check out your show, The Lisa Show.
Yep.
It's 107.9.
Yep. Or if they're listening to the show, you can just click over and subscribe to the show. All of our shows available in podcast form, and click subscribe there. Don't miss a single minute.